Maybe it's time you moved somewhere more suitable, Margaret. That was how my daughter-in-law chose to test my patience. Over lemon chicken and a dining table I had polished with my own hands for 30 years. She said it gently, almost kindly, as if she were suggesting a new brand of tea instead of the end of my independence. I looked at her across the table and smiled. I even passed her the salt. At 72, I have learned that the most powerful response is often the quietest one. My name is Margaret Collins, and this house, this white colonial with blue shutters and a maple tree out front, has been mine since 1989. My late husband, Daniel, and I bought it when interest rates were high and our savings were thin. We painted the walls ourselves. We measured every inch of crown molding with a borrowed ladder that wobbled more than it should have. Every room carries the echo of our laughter. The suggestion that I should leave it was not an accident. It was a strategy. My son, Ethan, sat beside his wife that evening. He didn't look at me when she spoke. He stared into his iced tea like it held instructions he couldn't quite read. It would be easier for everyone, Vanessa continued. Less maintenance. Fewer stairs. I live in a 2-story house, yes. 14 steps from the living room to the bedroom. I climb them every night without complaint. I walk a mile each morning around the neighborhood. I balance my own checkbook. I change my own air filters. There was no concern in her voice. Only calculation. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. That's thoughtful of you, I said. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I simply observed. Because 2 days earlier, I had noticed something unusual. A folder missing from my home office drawer. Copies of the deeds slightly out of alignment. Small things. The kind of details most people overlook. But when you have managed a household for decades, you learn to notice what shifts. I also noticed the phone call she took on the back patio that afternoon. Her voice low, hurried. We'll have it listed before summer, she had said. She didn't know the kitchen window was cracked open an inch. She didn't know I was watering the herbs just inside. I didn't confront her then. I let the words settle. Time has a way of revealing intentions more clearly than arguments ever could. At dinner, Ethan finally spoke. Mom, it's just something to think about. Just something to think about. As if my life could be packed into labeled boxes and stacked neatly in a 1-bedroom condo across town. I reached for my water glass. My hand was steady. I'll think about it, I replied. And I meant it. Not about moving. About them. About what they believed I was capable of. They mistook my silence for surrender. They mistook my patience for weakness. That was their first mistake. Because I have never rushed a decision in my life. Not when we bought this house. Not when we built our savings from scratch. And not now. They tested my patience. I let time answer. The morning after that dinner, I woke up at 6 as I always do. The house was quiet in a way that felt different, not peaceful but watchful. I brewed my coffee in the same ceramic mug Daniel gave me for our 25th anniversary. The handle has a small chip near the rim. I never replaced it. Some things deserve loyalty. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the maple tree in the front yard. The leaves were beginning to turn, soft shades of gold and red. And I thought about how seasons change slowly enough that you hardly notice until the color is undeniable. That is how manipulation works too. It does not arrive as a demand. It arrives as a suggestion. After breakfast, I walked through the house with a dust cloth, not because it needed dusting, but because movement helps me think. 14 steps up the staircase. 12 steps down. I ran my hand along the banister Daniel installed himself. Solid oak. Sanded smooth over decades of touch. Vanessa had mentioned stairs as if they were cliffs. I climbed them twice more just to feel the strength in my legs. Later that afternoon, Ethan stopped by alone. That in itself was unusual. He stood in the foyer, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at the framed family photos lining the wall. Photographs of birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings when he was still young enough to believe his mother could fix anything. Mom, she just worries about you, he said carefully. I nodded and invited him to sit. I poured him coffee the way I always have, 1 teaspoon of sugar, a splash of cream. He seemed surprised that I remembered. Maintenance on a place this size costs money, he continued. Property taxes go up every year. I had already paid this year's taxes in full. I had already scheduled the fall inspection for the furnace. I keep a folder in my desk labeled household. Every receipt. Every statement. Organized. Quiet strength does not announce itself. It prepares. I appreciate the concern, I told him. But I am not struggling. He looked relieved and disappointed at the same time. That was when I understood something important. This was not about my well-being. It was about control. That evening, after he left, I went to my home office and opened the drawer where the deed had been slightly out of place. I removed the documents and placed them on the desk. I read every line slowly, not because I did not know what they said, but because repetition sharpens resolve. I made a phone call to Harold Benson, the attorney who helped Daniel and me update our estate plan 5 years ago. I did not explain everything. I simply requested an appointment. "Of course, Margaret," he said. "Tomorrow at 10? I wrote it on my calendar in blue ink. Then I returned the documents to the drawer, perfectly aligned. I turned off the light and walked upstairs without hesitation. Patience is not passive. It is deliberate. And I was done observing. Now I would begin preparing. I arrived at Harold Benson's office 10 minutes early the next morning, as I always do when something matters. His building sits 3 blocks from the courthouse, a red brick structure with brass numbers polished to a soft shine. I have walked those steps before, but this time I noticed the weight of each one. Not heavy, just deliberate. Inside, the receptionist greeted me by name. That is the advantage of consistency. When you handle your affairs steadily for decades, people remember. Harold came out from behind his door with the same calm expression he has worn for years. He is in his late 60s now, hair more silver than brown, glasses resting low on his nose. "Margaret," he said, offering a firm handshake. "How can I help you?" I sat down across from his desk and placed my folder neatly in front of me. I did not rush. I did not dramatize. I simply explained that there had been conversations about selling my home, conversations that did not begin with me. I told him I wanted to review my deed, my trust, and every clause tied to the property. Harold listened without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and folded his hands. "Is anyone pressuring you?" he asked. "Not directly," I replied. "Not yet." That was the truth. Pressure does not always arrive as a raised voice. Sometimes it arrives disguised as concern. He opened the original estate documents Daniel and I had signed. The trust placed the house solely in my name until my passing. After that, it transferred to Ethan. Standard. Predictable. Harold looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "If your concern is influence," he said carefully, "there are ways to protect against that." He outlined options with measured clarity. A revised trust structure. A life estate with conditional terms. A clause that would delay full transfer if any beneficiary attempted to force a premature sale. Each possibility was legal. Each possibility was quiet. I listened to every word. "I would like to add protection," I told him, "specifically against coercion or outside interference." He nodded once. No judgment, just procedure. We drafted amendments that morning. The language was precise. If I remained in the home, no sale could occur without my written consent. If anyone attempted to pressure, manipulate, or misrepresent my wishes for personal gain, their additional discretionary inheritance would be revoked. Ethan would still be my son. He would still inherit, but only under conditions of respect. By 11:30, the paperwork was printed and ready for signature. I read every page. Slowly, I signed my name in steady ink. Margaret and Collins. No trembling. No hesitation. When I left the office, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. I drove home at the speed limit, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The maple tree in my yard caught the sunlight just as I pulled into the driveway. Nothing had changed on the outside. The shutters were still blue. The porch light still worked. But something had shifted beneath the surface. They believed the conversation was only beginning. They did not realize I had already secured the ending. Vanessa chose Sunday dinner to make her next move. She always preferred an audience. I could tell by the way she arranged the table herself that afternoon, replacing my simple white plates with the decorative set she had given me last Christmas. Presentation matters when you plan to control a narrative. Ethan arrived carrying a bottle of wine. He kissed my cheek, but his eyes scanned the room as if measuring square footage instead of memories. I served roast chicken, green beans, and mashed potatoes. Familiar food. Steady food. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa set her fork down with careful timing. "We have been looking at some beautiful condos near Riverside," she began, her voice warm and bright. "Elevators. Security. No yard work. It would be perfect for you." Perfect. Such a confident word. I took a sip of water before answering. "How thoughtful," I said evenly. "You have been busy." Ethan shifted in his chair. Mom, it is just an idea. The market is strong right now. Houses like this are selling fast. Houses like this. Not our house. Not your father's house. Not the place where you took your first steps in the living room, while Daniel clapped, so loudly the neighbors probably heard him. I kept my expression calm. And have you already spoken to someone about listing it? I asked. The question landed softly, but it landed. Vanessa hesitated for half a second too long. We have done some research, she replied. Research? That explained the copied documents. That explained the patio phone call. I nodded slowly as if impressed. I appreciate the initiative, I said. If there is ever a decision to be made, I will be sure to include you. The sentence was polite. It was also final. Silence settled over the table, thick but controlled. Ethan cleared his throat. We are only trying to help. I looked at my son then, really looked at him. He is 45 years old, taller than his father ever was, but still capable of looking like a boy when he feels uncertain. Help begins with asking, I said gently. Not planning. Vanessa's smile tightened at the edges. She reached for her wine glass, but did not drink. I could almost see the recalculation happening behind her eyes. They had expected resistance, perhaps tears, perhaps an argument they could label as stubbornness. They did not expect composure. After dessert, Ethan offered to wash the dishes. I let him. Vanessa wandered into the hallway, studying the framed photographs again, lingering near the staircase as if imagining furniture removed. I stood beside her quietly. The stairs are sturdy, I said. Daniel reinforced them himself. She glanced at me, unsure whether I was reminiscing or warning. The answer was both. That night, after they left, I locked the front door and turned off the porch light. The house felt steady around me. They believed momentum was on their side. They did not understand that momentum means nothing when the foundation is secured. And I had already secured mine. The following week, I decided to do something unexpected. I invited them back to dinner. Not because I had changed my mind, and not because I felt pressured, but because I wanted clarity under proper lighting. I chose Wednesday instead of Sunday. Less ceremonial, more practical. When Ethan arrived, he looked cautious, as though stepping into a room where the furniture might have been rearranged. Vanessa carried a folder tucked neatly under her arm. That told me everything. We sat at the kitchen table this time instead of the dining room. Simpler setting. No performance. I served soup and warm bread. Nothing elaborate. Vanessa waited until the bowls were half empty before she placed her folder on the table. We met with a real estate agent, she said carefully, just to understand the market. She slid a printed report toward me. Comparable homes. Estimated value. Projected closing timelines. I glanced at the top page, but did not linger. I had already reviewed my own market assessment online days earlier. Knowledge is quieter when you gather it yourself. It is a strong offer environment, Ethan added. You could walk away with significant equity. Walk away. The phrase echoed in my mind. I set my spoon down and folded my hands. Equity is not my concern, I replied. Stability is. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. You could buy something smaller and still have money left over. There it was again. Assumption disguised as advice. I do not need smaller, I said calmly. I need ownership of my decisions. Ethan exhaled slowly, frustration beginning to show. Mom, why are you being so resistant? I held his gaze. Because resistance implies pressure, I answered. And I do not recall applying for help. Silence filled the space between us. Not explosive, just undeniable. Vanessa straightened the papers. In her folder with deliberate care. We are thinking about the future, she said. I nodded once. So am I. That was the moment I chose to shift the ground beneath their feet. I met with Harold Benson last week. I continued evenly. Ethan's eyes lifted. Vanessa's hand paused mid-motion. We reviewed my estate plan. I did not elaborate. I did not need to. Information, when delivered without emotion, carries more weight. Everything is structured exactly as it should be, I said. And it will remain that way. Ethan swallowed. You changed something? He asked quietly. I offered a small smile. I clarified something. That was all. Vanessa closed her folder without another word. The papers made a soft sound against the cardboard, like a door shutting gently but firmly. They had expected negotiation. They encountered boundaries instead. After they left, I washed the dishes slowly, letting warm water run over my hands. Outside, the porch light cast a steady glow across the driveway. Control does not come from volume. It comes from preparation. And they were beginning to realize that I had prepared far more than they assumed. 3 days passed without a call. That silence told me more than any argument could have. Vanessa was not the type to retreat quietly. She recalculated. She reorganized. And when she returned, she would not come empty-handed. On Friday afternoon, my doorbell rang at exactly 2:15. I had just finished reviewing my monthly statements at the kitchen table. Through the front window, I saw a silver sedan parked behind Ethan's truck. A stranger stepped out first. A man in a navy blazer holding a leather portfolio. I did not rush to open the door. I walked at my normal pace. When I did open it, Vanessa smiled too brightly. "Margaret, this is Thomas Reed," she said. "He is a real estate advisor. We thought it might help to get a professional opinion." Thought, not asked. Behind her, Ethan avoided my eyes. Thomas extended his hand politely. "Ma'am, it is a pleasure. I am only here to provide information." I shook his hand firmly. "Information is always welcome," I replied. Decisions, however, remain mine. I invited them into the living room. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors. Daniel had refinished himself years ago. Thomas glanced around, evaluating crown molding, window frames, ceiling height. "Homes in this neighborhood are averaging $750 per square foot," he began, opening his portfolio. "Given your lot size and recent upgrades, you could expect strong interest." I listened without interruption. Vanessa stood near the fireplace, arms crossed loosely, as if already picturing the space empty. "Of course," Thomas continued, "timing matters. Inventory is limited. Buyers are motivated." I folded my hands in my lap. "And what would motivate me?" I asked gently. He paused. That question was not in his prepared script. "Financial security," he offered carefully. "Liquidity." I smiled. "My financial security is stable. My liquidity is managed. What I value here is continuity." Vanessa shifted her weight. "Margaret, nobody is forcing anything," she said. "We are just presenting options." I turned to her calmly. Presenting options without invitation feels like persuasion. The room grew still. Ethan finally spoke. "Mom, we only want what is best for you." I held his gaze the way I did when he was a child trying to explain a broken window. "Then trust me to define what is best," I answered. Thomas closed his portfolio slowly. He understood before the others did. "I appreciate your time," he said, standing. "Should you ever wish to explore the market, I would be glad to assist." I walked them to the door. Vanessa's smile had faded into something tighter, less certain. As their cars pulled away, I noticed something subtle. This was no longer about numbers. It was about control slipping through fingers that had reached too soon. Inside, the house felt steady again. 14 steps up. 14 steps down. Foundation intact. They had brought an expert to influence me. They left with clarity instead. And clarity, once delivered, cannot be undone. On Monday morning, Ethan called before 8. He has never been an early caller unless something is unsettled. His voice carried a tightness he tried to smooth over. "Mom, Vanessa feels like you are shutting us out," he said. I stood at the kitchen counter slicing an apple into even pieces, listening to the blade meet the cutting board in steady rhythm. "I am not shutting anyone out," I replied calmly. "I am setting boundaries." There was a pause on the line. "She thinks you do not trust her." I placed the knife down and wiped my hands with a towel. "Trust is built on respect," I said. "And respect begins with asking, not arranging." He exhaled slowly. "Can we all sit down together?" With Harold, that request told me more than he intended. They wanted confirmation. They wanted to see what had changed. "If it will bring clarity, yes," I answered. "Schedule a time." The meeting was set for Thursday afternoon at Harold's office. I arrived 5 minutes early. Ethan and Vanessa were already seated when I entered. Vanessa held her posture upright, composed, but her fingers tapped lightly against her purse strap. Harold greeted us all with professional warmth and took his seat behind the desk. Margaret asked to review and strengthen her estate structure. He began evenly. "Everything remains lawful and fully within her rights." Vanessa leaned forward. "We only want to understand what that means for the future," she said. Her tone was careful now. Harold opened a folder and slid a copy of the amended trust across the desk. "The property remains solely under Margaret's control during her lifetime," he explained. "Any decision to sell must originate from her written consent. Additionally, there is a protective clause." Ethan frowned slightly. "Protective against what?" Harold adjusted his glasses. Against undue influence or coercion. If any beneficiary attempts to pressure or manipulate her into altering her living situation for personal financial gain, certain discretionary inheritances may be revoked. The room grew very still. Vanessa's tapping stopped. Ethan looked at me, confusion mixed with realization. "You think we would do that?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes without anger. "I think prevention is wiser than regret," I replied. Vanessa straightened her shoulders. "This feels extreme," she said. Harold's voice remained neutral. "It is precautionary. Many clients choose similar language to ensure autonomy. No accusations were spoken. No names were attached. Only principles were defined." Ethan leaned back in his chair, absorbing the implication. Vanessa's expression shifted from confidence to calculation, then to something closer to restraint. "So nothing changes unless you decide," Ethan said slowly. "Correct," Harold confirmed. I folded my hands in my lap. "I value peace," I said. "Peace requires clarity." The meeting ended without raised voices. Outside, in the hallway, Ethan lingered while Vanessa walked ahead toward the elevator. "Mom," he said softly, "you could have just talked to us." I placed a gentle hand on his arm. "I am talking to you," I answered, in a language that protects me. He did not argue. As I stepped into the afternoon light, I felt no triumph. Only steadiness. They had wanted transparency. Now they had it. And transparency, once established, makes manipulation far more difficult to attempt. For nearly 2 weeks after that meeting, there were no surprise visits, no printed reports, no carefully worded suggestions disguised as concern. The silence felt different this time. Not strategic, not confident, just uncertain. I continued my routines without alteration. I walked my mile each morning, counting steady breaths as I passed the Hendersons' white fence and the old oak at the corner of Maple Street. I paid my utilities online, reviewed my investment statements, and scheduled the annual roof inspection. Stability is built from ordinary tasks done consistently. On the third Sunday after our meeting, Ethan called and asked if he could stop by alone. His voice sounded less defensive and more reflective. When he arrived, he did not bring wine or documents. He brought a small box of cinnamon rolls from the bakery I used to take him to when he was 10 years old. He set them on the kitchen counter and stood quietly for a moment, looking around the room as if seeing it without commentary for the first time. "I did not realize how far this was going," he said finally. I poured coffee for both of us and sat across from him at the table. "It went as far as it needed to," I replied calmly. He nodded slowly. "Vanessa thought you were being stubborn. I thought you were overreacting." He paused. "Now I see you were protecting yourself." I did not rush to comfort him. Understanding grows best when it is not interrupted. "This house is not only property," I said. "It is history. It is security. It is choice." He ran his hand along the edge of the table, the same table where he once did homework while Daniel explained fractions with patient precision. "She keeps talking about upgrades and investments," he admitted. "Bigger opportunities." I met his gaze gently. "Opportunities that require selling someone else's foundation are rarely equal," I said. He was quiet after that. Later that week, I received a brief message from Vanessa. It was polite, measured. She apologized if her approach had felt forceful. She said her intentions were practical. I read the message twice before replying. My response was simple. "I appreciate clarity. I value respect. Decisions about my life will always begin with me." Nothing more was needed. The following Friday, I noticed something subtle when they both came for dinner again. Vanessa did not study the walls. She did not comment on square footage. She asked about my garden instead. Small shift. Measured change. Control had loosened because the boundaries were firm. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. I served dessert and listened to ordinary conversation. Peace does not arrive dramatically. It settles slowly when everyone understands the limits. And in this house, the limits were no longer negotiable. Winter arrived quietly that year. The maple tree in the front yard dropped its last leaves in a single windy afternoon, and by December the branches stood bare against a pale gray sky. I watched the seasons change from the same living room window Daniel once stood beside, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee before work. The house felt steady, not triumphant, just steady. Ethan and Vanessa adjusted in ways that were small but noticeable. Conversations shifted from square footage to holiday plans, from market value to family recipes. Boundaries, once drawn clearly, tend to reshape behavior without further instruction. On Christmas Eve, they came over early to help me decorate the tree. Ethan carried the storage boxes down from the attic, one careful step at a time. 14 steps down the staircase he once implied might be too much for me. He did not comment on the stairs now. Vanessa unwrapped ornaments slowly, asking about their history instead of suggesting updates. She held a glass angel in her hand and asked where it came from. Your father-in-law bought it in 1992, I told her. He said it reminded him that patience shines brighter than noise. She nodded thoughtfully and placed it near the center of the tree. Something in her posture had softened. Not defeated, just aware. Later that evening, after dinner, Ethan lingered by the fireplace while Vanessa washed dishes beside me. I understand now, she said quietly, without meeting my eyes. It was never about the house for you. I dried a plate and placed it in the cabinet. It was about being heard, I replied. She gave a small nod. No defensiveness, no rehearsed tone, just acknowledgement. That was enough. Months passed, and the subject of selling never returned. The market cooled slightly in the spring. Interest rates rose. The urgency they once felt dissolved on its own. Time did what arguments could not. It revealed intention, corrected assumption, and restored balance without spectacle. On my 73rd birthday, Ethan surprised me by installing new handrails along the back porch steps. Just to make things easier, he said with a smile. This time, the suggestion carried no agenda, only care. I ran my hand along the smooth wood and thanked him. Inside, the house remained exactly where it had always been. Walls intact, floors steady, documents secure in a drawer that no one else now opened. I did not win a battle because there was never meant to be one. I preserved my ground by refusing to surrender it. They tested limits without fully understanding them. In the end, nothing dramatic happened. No raised voices. No shattered relationships. Only clarity. And clarity, once earned, tends to last longer than control ever could.